Greetings, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I'm Michael O'Hanlon with the Foreign Policy Program at Brookings, and I'm really just thrilled and privileged to be able to join in with the Wounded Warrior Project, as well as the White House today, for an important discussion on veterans' needs here in the year 2022. And in fact, in the course of this event, we'll almost bring ourselves up to 2:22 in the afternoon on 2/22/22. So let's hope it's a good omen for building on the excellent work that we're going to discuss today, which is a survey by the Wounded Warrior Project, an annual survey they've done for quite some time now, focused on the post-9/11 generation and the warriors of various military services of all genders and races, of all different kinds of injuries and sicknesses that they've incurred over the years as a result or during their service, and their best effort to explain to the rest of us in the policy world and their fellow Americans how they're doing, where they most need additional support or help, and therefore hopefully a basis for a very good policy conversation about where veterans policy in the United States can still improve. I think it's fair to say, as a country, we've devoted a lot of resources to this problem, and we've also, as a country, tended to admire and support our veterans. This is, these are the good news stories out of the post-9/11 world and how this population has been serviced, not only those who have participated in the survey, but more generally, the veterans population in the United States today, which, by the way, still numbers about 20 million people. But the Wounded Warrior survey was for a still large group, but a specific group of somewhere in the range of 150,000. You'll learn more about that very soon from an excellent video they've prepared. And what this video does is provide us their greatest concerns on issues ranging from access to physical healthcare, medical healthcare, access to mental health care, their sense of community, their sense of belonging, their economic opportunities, their financial challenges, their concerns about the future and health challenges that may arise because of concern to toxic exposure, gender issues, including the very sad and tragic issue of sexual assault within the military. All of these kinds of questions are addressed. So before we hit the video and then thereafter launch into our panel discussion, let me briefly introduce the distinguished Americans that I'm fortunate to be sharing this panel with today. And again, we're all grateful for your attendance and your participation. You can send questions, which we'll get to in the last 20 to 30 minutes or so, to events@brookings.edu. Again, events@brookings.edu. Jennifer Silva is the Chief Program Officer at the Wounded Warrior Project, and she will be also the first to explain what we've just seen in the video after we show it here in just a moment. A person I've been privileged to collaborate with on these sorts of events for a number of years and who's shown just a tenacious commitment to the nation's veterans in this current position and throughout her life and career. She's joined by two of her excellent vice presidents within the program, Melanie Musso and Tracy Farrell, who have different responsibilities. Melanie more focused on, at least for today's purposes, helping us understand the survey, its chief findings and the data. Tracy involved very much in what the Wounded Warrior Project tries to do in response to this survey and all previous surveys and the programmatic and other needs of the veterans population, specifically those who work with the Wounded Warrior Project, which, as you know, is a non-governmental organization that's just done amazing work now for the better part of 2 decades and continues to serve its fellow Americans with great compassion and commitment. Terri Tanielian works at the White House. She is Special Assistant to the President for Veterans Affairs. So an extraordinarily influential and important person to have with us in conversation today. And I'm sure in the course of the discussion, she can explain how the Biden administration and Washington more generally perhaps look at our current state of affairs in trying to help our veterans populations, but also in where policymakers need new ideas and are contemplating new initiatives for those needs that are not yet well addressed and that are emerging and becoming more clear, largely as a result of the survey. So without further ado, we are now about to play that video. It lasts about 6 minutes. It's very nicely done. I've seen it this year and on previous occasions. It'll really hit home the key points. You can also go online to the Wounded Warrior Project and find the survey, which I think was embargoed until just today. And that'll have more complete findings, including also an executive summary that's a very easy read with very good visual graphics, but some really important data. So my colleague Harold, without further ado, I will now turn the floor to you to please roll the video, and we'll see y'all in about 6 minutes.
I speak for CSX and our more than 20,000 employees when I share how honored we are to sponsor Wounded Warrior Project's annual Warrior Survey. Not only are we a proud military-friendly employer, but through our community investment initiative, Pride in Service, we aim to connect veterans and military families across our service network with the resources and support they need year-round. Nearly 1 in 5 of our team members has served their country or community in some capacity. So we have a vested interest in identifying and supporting the needs of veterans. CSX also strongly believes in the power of public-private partnerships to maximize the societal impact we can collectively make. Wounded Warrior Project's annual Warrior Survey is the most comprehensive report on the needs and trends of America's wounded post-9/11 veterans. Therefore, we're pleased to bring our resources to bear to drive further insight gathering that businesses, government, and healthcare organizations can use to better support wounded warriors and their families in the future.
September 11th, 2001 changed the course of history. For the brave men and women who stepped up to serve, it changed the course of their lives.
The main reason I enlisted in the Army was because of 9/11. I was a sophomore in high school when the towers fell. Why would somebody come to our home and kill innocent people? I was just really angry about it. And that's a driving factor in why I enlisted.
It's impossible to comprehend the sacrifices, but important to understand the experiences of these heroes. Wounded Warrior Project's annual Warrior Survey is the largest, most comprehensive study of injured veterans who served after September 11th. These are some of the key findings from the 2021 survey, which represents more than 152,000 warriors and helps us tell their stories.
I was a specialist in the U.S. Army, and I was deployed to Baghdad, Iraq. I was injured on December 17th, 2007. I never thought I would get hurt. Being disabled never crossed my mind.
Nearly 8 in 10 warriors have a service-connected disability rating of 70% or higher. The most common injuries and health problems reported by warriors include sleep problems, PTSD, anxiety, and depression, followed by bone, muscle, or joint injuries, hearing loss or tinnitus, migraines or chronic headaches, and traumatic brain injury. 41% of warriors reported difficulty getting care for their physical injuries or health problems, and 20% had difficulty getting mental health care. 98% of warriors reported exposure to hazardous or toxic substances during service. Less than a third who have filed a VA disability claim for an exposure-related condition have been granted a VA service connection.
My last deployment in Afghanistan was from 2010 to 2011. That deployment took a really heavy toll on me. I was a victim of military sexual trauma. The things that they did, no one should endure. So I carried that with me throughout my military career.
67% of women warriors experienced military sexual trauma. Nearly 1 in 4 military sexual trauma survivors believes that VA providers are not sensitive enough to women's needs, and there is not enough access to VA women's services.
I retired in 2008 after my deployment from Iraq. I came home. I was a bit broken. I gradually learned that loud sounds would scare me. People too close to me would give me anxiety. I rationalized in my mind that the best thing for me was peace. And the only way I thought I could obtain that peace was by taking my own life.
16% of warriors have attempted suicide at least once in their lifetimes. Nearly 1 in 4 warriors have had suicidal thoughts in the past 12 months. Of warriors who reported suicidal thoughts, 70% report having them in the past 2 weeks.
I sustained a traumatic brain injury while serving in Afghanistan. I never thought I would go to college in a million years, and so I started college and stuck with it and got my master's degree in sports medicine.
43% of warriors have a bachelor's degree or higher, compared to 31% of the general U.S. population. Despite higher rates of education, the warrior population still faces an unemployment rate more than twice as high as the general population. 42% of warriors report that they did not have enough money to make ends meet at some point in the last 12 months. These statistics are more than just numbers. They represent the hardships faced by warriors each day. We share their stories to ensure their voice never falls silent, and to urge those who can make a difference to do what's right.
Wounded Warrior Project's always been there, and that is something that we need to have as Wounded Warriors, to be able to come together, go, be around people that have shared experiences.
Wounded Warrior Project helped me with, most importantly for me, was my resilience. They helped me just continue to build on that resilience that I already had in the military that I lost.
My life is so much better now. PTSD is still there. I manage it. I am not so isolated as I used to be. I enjoy getting out. I enjoy family, but I'm in a much better place now.
I definitely would not be where I am today, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, if it was not for Wounded Warrior Project.
Understanding the challenges is the first step in finding solutions. Read the full report at annualwarriorsurvey.com.
It's a very powerful and informative video. And Jennifer, I'm thrilled that you're here to speak to it and to explain more about it. So the floor is yours, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And we're really grateful to be here today to highlight some of these findings. We've been passionate about our annual Warrior Survey for over a decade now. We really want to, the whole reason we started this effort over a decade ago was to make sure that we put our precious resources towards the biggest challenges for the warriors and families that we've served over time. And so we wanted to make sure, in order to foster the most successful, well-adjusted generation of injured veterans in our nation's history, we wanted to tackle those biggest challenges and to make sure that they could really thrive after service. So one of the ways that we do that is through our annual Warrior Survey. And we're very grateful to warriors who give of their time and give us their feedback to make sure that we're putting our resources towards the areas where they still need some help. And they do this on an annual basis. And how we use it, we shape all of our program decisions based on this data and our operational data as we operate across the country in our over a dozen programs. And so we use these findings to identify new ways to better serve the warriors and family members. Also, we highlight it with our partners, and it's a core part of our advocacy efforts. We're really excited that these findings very much help policymakers and government organizations use this data, because these are the wounded, injured, or ill post 9/11 veterans in this survey. And so these are the patients at the VA centers. And so this is a population that is very important to know where to funnel our efforts. And so that's really why we have done this over the last dozen or so years. And we're grateful that it's of service to both obviously us at Wounded Warrior Project, but the whole space, anybody who's helping veterans.
Thank you, Jennifer. And before I ask Melanie to now comment on some more specifics, I wanted to ask you one more follow-up question, which is, again, all four of you are remarkable people who have been dedicated to this issue as professionals, but also have family and personal reasons why, these issues matter to you and have served the country in one way or another yourselves. And I guess I wanted to just ask you for a gut check as to where we are in 2022. Compared to where you might have expected or hoped or aspired when you first got into this business. Obviously, we had a lot more people hurt and affected by the wars of Iraq, Afghanistan, and the war on terror more generally, and just U.S. military operations globally than we would have wanted. But given the number of people who have been adversely affected, how do you feel like we're doing by them collectively as a nation overall? And then maybe we can situate the enduring problems within that kind of a framework.
Sure. Yeah. So I think it's a story of hope and resilience. I started in this role at Wounded Warrior Project in 2008. And one of the things that's really interesting to me is we had a large investment in mental health programming back then, but we didn't talk about it externally in terms of supporters. Now we're able to talk about it in supporters want to be part of that solution to increase access to mental health, to increase service to the warriors and their family members so they can really thrive. So I think that's a story of hope, even though there's still challenges. As you saw in the video, there's definitely ongoing challenges, but warriors are willing to ask for help, and we need to make sure that they have access to that help, whether it's in informal peer support groups or in evidence-based high quality care, whatever door needs to open for them. I actually think we're in a much better place now with that. We still have some big challenges when it comes to gender specific care for women warriors, et cetera. And there's and obviously toxic exposures are just coming to be a very big priority for everybody involved in this space. But I would just say I'm heartened by where we are, and I think it's important for organizations like Wounded Warrior Project, and we're very grateful for champions like Terri Tanielian, who's here today, to champion the stories of resilience, but where there are still challenges and where we can be of service to these great heroes.
Thank you. That's great to hear. But as you say, still also a lot of work left to do. And so, Melanie, sure. I know you'd like to explain to us some of where the most important findings are from your vantage point, and some of them, actionable and demanding policy reforms and initiatives to the extent we can. Over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you. And it's great to be here again this afternoon and talk about this year's survey. As you all saw in the video, this survey is the largest and most comprehensive survey of its kind of the post 9/11 wounded, injured, and ill veteran population. And this year, we were extremely honored to have almost 18,000 Wounded Warrior Project warriors complete this most recent survey during the summer of 2021. And really, it is the voice of the over 152,000 of those registered with us. I want to talk a little bit about the survey design because it's important because we made a change this year, which is going to allow us with greater precision and accuracy to predict and anticipate subsequent changes, because we know that the changes aren't going to dissipate. So it'll allow us to be able to adapt and be more flexible as we continue down the road in the future. So this year we selected a representative sample of our warrior population to participate in this study. And year over year, we will continue to track and follow those warriors to evaluate, monitor their changes and needs, as well as priorities. So as Jen mentioned in her opening remarks, that we can tailor not only our programming, but we can share these findings with the broader population so that we can have a unified and a comprehensive response to them. As we talk about some of the key findings, there's really 4 major buckets of themes that emerge from this year's report. The first is that mental health continues to be a critical concern for post 9/11 wounded warriors. The second is, as Jen alluded to, toxic exposure is a major health concern for post 9/11 wounded warriors. In the third bucket, and as you saw Tanya in the video talk about, women warriors experience unique challenges as well as gaps in their care. And then the last bucket of high-level findings that I'd like to highlight is really that this past year we saw that warriors were struggling to make ends meet and really manage their finances. So when we look at this being a comprehensive study and assessment of the current state of warriors, we certainly see challenges on mental health, physical health, financial health, and women-specific issues really bubble to the top.
Thank you. And I'm struck that some of these issues are problems that we've created for ourselves as a nation, and where the Wounded Warrior Project and other NGOs and government servants who recognize the problem and want to change the way we've been handling things, like Terri, where everybody is aware that whatever the fault, now there's a problem that has to be addressed. So this is not all about combat-related injury or trauma. The toxic waste issue is partly the kinds of practices that we ourselves adopted in war zones, and some of it's understandable, I suppose. You don't have time to set up proper incineration system or what have you if you're temporarily deployed. But in other cases, we were probably careless and insufficiently attentive and created toxicity in environments where our warriors were living 24/7. And of course, the sexual trauma issue is just horrible to hear about. And it's a real stain on one of the most amazing institutions in the United States, the U.S. Armed Forces. And it's something where we've just got to figure out how to do better, even if so I'm sorry to be a little bit preachy, but I'm just trying to offer you a chance to respond to my reaction to the survey. These are a couple of points that jump out at me. And so I wondered if there's anything further, maybe a way I can put it into a question is, given your background in this and how familiar you are with the survey and the 18,000 who completed it, is there anything that really jumps out at you as a big surprise or a particular clarion call to action?
Was that for anybody who wanted to answer?
That was for Melanie, just as we work through the sequence.
Okay,
but I'm just, of course, Terri and others speak to it as well later on.
Absolutely. As we look at the data, I think that where we see the significance, and I think you had highlighted kind of the intersection of the mental and the physical injuries and challenges, and this year at the top of the list, and this really I think encapsulates how there's the intersection of those two, is that the number one self-reported injury among warriors are sleep problems. And at the surface, that may seem minor or inconsequential, but really when you tease apart really the impact of sleep on overall quality of life, it is both a symptom as well as an injury in of itself. If you're not able to have restorative or restful sleep, it impacts everything from your cognitive functioning, your ability to perform daily tasks. So it really transcends into social and relationship issues, but it also is a reflection of, in some cases, a traumatic brain injury, a reflection of symptomology related to PTSD. So it's really important that we don't turn a blind eye to what at face value may seem very simple, but the rates of not only sleep problems and disturbances, the majority of warriors have challenges with sleep. And in fact, the vast majority have less than 7 hours of sleep and significantly less than the general population. So it's really important that we not turn a blind eye to the sleep challenges and what that represents. So I think for me personally, that's one of the findings that jumps out this year, but I'll certainly let my esteemed panelists reflect as well.
Thank you. And in that vein, Tracy, straight over to you.
Yeah, so I think I agree with what Melanie said, absolutely. In fact, we invest resources and energy into examining what the sleep issues are and what contributes to that. But what I wanted to do is, Jen talked about the why of this survey, and Melanie talked a little bit about the how and what the key issues were. I'm going to demonstrate how we put this into action as an organization. And specifically, that's with regards to women warriors. So we saw over the years that you mentioned previously that women were responding to the survey with different results than our male counterparts were. And so in 2020, we took a step back and actually we talked with you about this and developed the Women Warriors Initiative for Wounded Warrior Project. And what that did was send out a survey to over 20,000 women, 5,000 of whom responded. And then we had roundtables, which captured more information. This drove our advocacy and programming efforts in 2021. In fact, we have had the opportunity on multiple times to testify before Congress about the unique issues that women face, to include the trauma incurred by MST. We were also, through our relationships in this space and being seen as somebody who has studied this issue, we're able to contribute to the 2021 enactment of the Protecting Moms Who Served Act, which provides community maternity care providers with training and support for pregnant and postpartum veterans. So we continue to advocate with our 3 initiatives for this year being to improve accessibility and availability of women's health care, greater coordination across agencies and disciplines for MST, military sexual trauma survivors, and improving the transition process as one separates from the service. So I really think it's important to show that not only does our programming and advocacy impacted by this space, but other legislation and information for others does as well.
Thank you very much. And Terri, we're privileged to have you join us today. I just love your overall take on what you've heard so far, what you've seen in the survey, and anything you want to tell us about Biden administration perspectives on this issue. So thank you very much, and over to you.
Thanks, Michael. It really is a great privilege to be with these rockstar women and talk about a really important topic. So thank you, Michael, to Brookings for the invitation, and to Wounded Warrior Project for the opportunity to, again, kind of think about how your data and this survey fits in our knowledge base for really driving forward with evidence-based solutions to serve this population. You know, I think that it's a unique opportunity for me to be here as Special Assistant to the President for Veterans Affairs, and to kind of use these type of data to really think about what types of policy solutions are needed to fill gaps and meet needs. You know, the 3.5 million individuals, veterans who served in the post 9/11 era, this population is particularly important. You've all heard President Biden say multiple times that our nation has one true sacred obligation, and that is to care for the troops that we send into harm's way, and to care for them and their families when they return home. And so for understanding the needs of the wounded, ill, and injured population, these data are really tremendously important and impactful in helping us understand where work is still needed. I think, you know, the 4 buckets that Melanie highlighted reinforce kind of where we know priority work is needed, and kind of emphasize that it is where we've been focused early on as well, in terms of what we've been able to do to provide some economic relief to veterans as well as non-veterans. I mean, let's, you know, really recognize the challenges that many families have faced over the past couple of years, you know, with dealing with the pandemic and the economic uncertainty. But at the same time, mental health continues to be a major focus, an area. Military sexual trauma, you know, we were pleased to see Secretary Austin, you know, implement the Independent Review Commission to focus specifically on military sexual harassment and sexual assault, and to kind of move out swiftly in implementing some of the recommendations that that Independent Review Commission made, so that we can continue to address the issues of military sexual trauma. So, you know, supporting our veterans, their families, and caregivers is traditionally a bipartisan issue. And we're really working hard to make sure that we leverage a whole of government response. And while the Department of Veterans Affairs, and we've heard the Secretary talk about his primary focus be on ensuring timely access to world-class benefits and services, we know that there are other parts of the federal government that are also critical in delivering services and benefits to this population so that they can thrive. And I think that that's the opportunity we have in thinking through how we work with our colleagues on the Hill, but also how we work with the entire federal government to leverage all of the assets we can to meet the needs of this population. So thank you.
Thank you very much. And for what you're doing, most importantly of all. I think that because we now have most of the issues on the table, and you've all spoken to them already, so exposure to toxic substances, military sexual trauma, financial challenges, especially in transition, specific needs of women warriors, and also the constellation of conflated challenges involving PTS and sleep and anxiety and depression. And by the way, I think we should probably continue to reiterate, you know, as I know you do often, things like where to go for help, where to go if you're feeling suicidal, where to go if you don't think the Veterans Affairs Administration is somehow answering your needs. So I'm sure both on the web and in today's conversation, you'll all speak to that. But I guess since there's so much on the table, let me just ask one big broad question for the group. And then I see we've already got about a dozen questions from the audience, and I'll go to those pretty soon. But I guess the way I would ask this question, it seems like some of these problems are more for the government to think of a new policy. Some of them are more for the general American population to be aware of where our veterans can still benefit from reaching out a hand. And these are probably issues beyond the veterans population, but because they've served and done so much for us, maybe this heightens the way in which, you know, we all have to be thinking about how we can help as private citizens. In some cases, we need reforms within the system. The big debate, for example, about how we discourage and punish military sexual abuse within the ranks, which remains an ongoing debate. And that's not so much of creating a new program or adding resources, that's more about authorities and discipline and related matters. So I guess I would ask each of you to offer at least one or two suggestions, but be specific about who you're asking to address the problem. Is it somebody within DOD, somebody within Veterans Affairs, me as a private citizen, the Congress, the administration, as well as the Congress together, because again, some of these problems, it seems, need to be tackled from multiple directions, and they aren't all just matters that sort of the big hand of Washington is going to address. And of course, the Wounded Warrior Project as an NGO was created partly in the recognition that the government couldn't always be relied upon, at least to be the first mover. Sometimes you needed smaller, more entrepreneurial organizations, less encumbered by bureaucracy, more directly connected to the veterans population, to highlight issues, to push solutions, and then hope those would be generalized later. So to the extent you want to work through the findings and offer a suggestion or two, but tell us, please, who needs to act on that? And if you see the spirit of my question, I hope that will help focus the next round of conversation before we go to the audience. If I could start with you again, please, Jennifer.
I guess the bottom line is, I believe it depends on the issue in what you're really trying to do. In all of those buckets that we talked about and that the key findings from our survey, it depends. Toxic exposure right now, that is very much in the lawmakers' hands in terms of the next step for getting the warriors who were exposed. Again, almost 100% of the warriors that answered, they were exposed to toxic exposures. And right now there's big legislation out there to comprehensively give them access to care, make sure that they have presumptive conditions that are attributed to this toxic exposure experience. And so right now it's in that court, I guess, the ball's in that court. I would say in terms of mental health, the challenges, that is a more hybrid approach, in my opinion. Where they feel comfortable and where they're willing to get care is very important. Whether it's a buddy who gets them into a peer support group and then can get them into care, that's very important. A quarter of our warriors had suicidal thoughts in the last 12 months. We want to get upstream of those more emergent situations and make sure that we decrease their isolation, get them connected with each other, get them connected to resources in their communities. And the VA's been a champion for community resources in that way. One of the areas that we've been investing in since our inception is that mental health care and access to evidence-based high quality care. Just this past November, we announced a bigger investment into our already big investment in our Warrior Care Network, partnering with 4 academic medical centers. Now, what we were finding was there were barriers to this high quality care in the areas of substance use disorder and traumatic brain injury. So we invested to make sure that we treat the whole warrior. And so there's no gap in treatment to make sure that we don't have to have the substance use disorder treated before they get PTSD care. And evidence is showing that the outcomes are as high, if not higher, when you treat the whole warrior and there's no gap in care. And so the Warrior Care Network is a public-private partnership. We have a collaboration with the VA there in 4 world-class academic centers who provide a year's worth of care in 2 weeks. So that warrior gets an intensive outpatient program and they thrive after that with reduced symptomology for PTSD, increased resilience, decreased depression for 100 or more days when they're back home and back in the VA care. So it's kind of like a handoff to private care and then back into the VA. And I think that's a great representation of a public-private partnership that works for that. So those are 2 buckets that I would say depends on the issue, but those are 2 examples where I'd say, just highlight who owns what, I guess.
It's really helpful for me, and I'm sure for many. Melanie, I hope you could contribute in the same kind of vein and maybe add a couple more examples if you wish.
Absolutely, I do, and it will be a little bit broader of a brushstroke, but it is really regarding the availability of data. Again, with this being the largest and most comprehensive survey of post 9/11 wounded veterans, we have a wealth of information that is available for those that are in positions to make decisions, to employ innovations, to be able to overcome the challenges that are being faced. And so really not zoning in necessarily on a single data point specifically as a call to action, but leveraging this tool as a way to help guide decision-making practices looking at the barriers and the obstacles to care, looking at where there are challenges being experienced by warriors and where those biggest opportunities remain, and being able to make data-driven and data-informed decisions to be able to tackle those challenges so that we can have a broader impact, because we know and recognize at Wounded Warrior Project that we can't do it all alone. So it's critical that we do share this information in a forum like today, and sharing the results on our website year over year, so that we can make broad changes. So I'm encouraging all those, that from private citizens to individuals in various levels of position, to make change, look at the data to be able to guide decision making, because as Jen mentioned in our opening remarks, warriors have taken the time to tell us where they have challenges, opportunities to overcome. So a broad brushstroke, but I really would like to underscore that this is not just for us to use to guide our policy advocacy and programming efforts, but really is a resource and a tool for the broader space.
Thank you. And if I could now ask you, Tracy, to speak to the same broad question, please.
Sure. So I think there's two areas, and one is probably a call to action to my fellow veterans. What we've seen with regards to peer support is that those that are connected with peer support, or those who have been in service with them, are 57% lower among warriors to experience PTSD symptoms. And so just by linking with a friend or with an organization or with the VA's peer support program can have immense benefits in a warrior's mental and emotional well-being. So that's one area, and that could be for my fellow veterans, the VA, communities, DOD, everybody. Peer support is really important. I can't underline that enough. And then the second is with regards to the MST process of moving from the military into the VA healthcare system. There's a couple of bills that are out there right now that talk to access to care, the processing system, the sharing of information, and the peer support, again, within the VBA process, the veteran benefits process. So I think those are two very great areas where we could put some energy and efforts as the United States.
Thank you. And Terri, over to you again, if I could, please. And particularly interested as what you would see as major policy priorities for the Biden administration and the Congress right now, but also more generally, anything you want to say in response to my question, please.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. I actually think that there's probably a role for each of those different types of stakeholders with every single one of the issues that have been kind of highlighted. And so there may be varying degrees of responsibility, but I do think that there's a role for the government, a role for non-governmental organizations and community-based programs in ways in which they can reach populations that perhaps aren't served by federal programs. And also, for, as Tracy kind of noted, kind of the veterans themselves and how they can be more engaged in self-care, but also in peer support and really serve as kind of important ambassadors, if you will, for ensuring the needs of veterans are met. And then, of course, the advocacy community, because that's critically important in helping to draw attention to the needed issues. As has been alluded to, mental health and suicide is a critical priority for us. We have been focused on looking how we can improve suicide prevention resources and mental health service delivery. And certainly that was communicated through the FY22 President's budget in terms of the resources that we believe are necessary to meet the needs there. We released a strategy to kind of really focus our efforts around actions that we know can actually reduce suicide risk and save lives. And so we've been really focused on using those resources wisely to improve lethal means, to really also look at ways that we can improve crisis care and transitions for people who are experiencing suicidal and mental health crises, et cetera. And all that needs to be done in partnership, through the government as well as in the non-governmental sector. Around, ensuring that we're meeting the needs, gender-specific needs of women. Certainly that's an area where there's been important legislation passed, and VA is working to implement several elements of not only the Deborah Sampson Act, but, as Tracy mentioned, the legislation that was signed at the end of last year, I think it was already, and really trying to drive forward with additional gender-specific women services for women vets. And I think that's going to be a continuing priority. Addressing environmental exposures. Here, there is a role for both what we need to do through DoD in making data available and being able to understand the types of exposures that our service members, veterans, and their families may experience during their military service, so that we can have a better understanding of the types of information and data tracking that will be necessary to anticipate and understand the potential adverse health consequences. We have been focused on what we can do within our existing administrative authority, both pursuing rulemaking, as you saw last year with the expansion of service connection to 3 respiratory conditions, but then also changing processes so that we can do things more quickly and agile, and in ways that we can deliver benefits more efficiently to those who need them. But we do need, additional legislative focus here. And as Jen mentioned, there's a lot of activity on these topics right now. So we're looking forward to continuing to work with Congress in that regard. This is a priority for us. And it is something that we are, I would say, really laser focused on, and ensuring that we can address the adverse health consequences associated with environmental exposures that our military service members and veterans experience. And I will say that that's not limited to just those in terms of burn pits, but we know that there are other types of hazardous substances and experiences that our service members and veterans experience as well. And so, as we leverage through DoD, VA, and I mentioned, as we address some of these other critical priorities, we're partnering with HHS, for example, and implementing some of the suicide prevention programs that will reach veterans in their communities. This really is about a whole of government, but it's not just the whole of government alone. It's in partnership with external partners in ways that we can make sure that we're reaching the population who needs the services. And in the backdrop of what we know we're facing right now in America, a mental health crisis, an overdose epidemic, continuing to fight the COVID pandemic. These are all issues that touch veterans and their families, and kind of provide laser focus for how we do so really comprehensively and systemically. So thanks for the question.
Thank you for the excellent answer. And let me now just add one more question, a little more targeted for myself before I go to audience questions. As I read through the survey, in addition to the points that you've all highlighted, there were 2 additional questions that occurred to me that have to some extent been ongoing issues and questions in this space for years and in the time we've collaborated. One has to do with access to mental health care and options for mental health care treatment. To what extent have we made it possible for those who may not feel a proclivity towards the Veterans Affairs Department, may not feel that's the best place to go for mental health in particular, whether they're right or wrong, they have a certain reason they're not comfortable going down that path. To what extent have we made it easy enough for veterans to access the full range of possible mental health care providers in dealing with their challenges? And, I don't know if that's a naive question, but I would just be curious. And then when I see the severity of the unemployment rate for wounded warriors, again, those who took your survey, but I think the numbers are higher than the average, even across the general veteran population, although I haven't seen those in a while. But especially for those who took your survey and report to have some significant either illness or injury that's enduring, as almost all of your respondents do. Why is that unemployment rate up there at 13%? Is it primarily because of the issues that go along with their injuries or illnesses, and they just don't feel up to holding a job? Or is it that somehow we as Americans writ large, we as employers writ large, still haven't done quite enough to reach out to them and meet them halfway? I know that a lot of federal law has prioritized the hiring of veterans. So maybe the federal government is not the problem here, but maybe the rest of us need to be a little bit more forward leaning. Or maybe what that number really reflects, again, is that there's just a lot of wounded warriors who have such significant issues that it's hard to hold a job, hard to stay focused. Do you have a sense as to which of those factors is more important? So if I could go through with the same order, please, I'd be grateful. Starting with Jen.
Thanks, Michael. I'll take the first part first, the access to non-VA care. And when you're in care in the VA, warriors have told us that it goes well. And so that's great. And oftentimes, though, there are obstacles to getting access to that high quality care. And so in the communities, it's very important to make sure that there are opportunities for them to receive great health care, mental health care. We found great success with our telemental health We've been able to provide that across the country, and it's specifically important for women warriors. They don't have to get childcare, they don't have to drive to an appointment, and they have kind of oversubscribed to that. They are using our telemental health care quite a bit, and so it's fantastic. They're not waiting until maybe an emergent situation. They're not deprioritizing their care because it's just easier to get to it. So I would say that's been a real silver lining, I guess, of the COVID times. We've been able to provide that for both male and female veterans. Wherever they can get high quality evidence-based care, we want to be part of that. And so we've been able to also do emotional support calls as well. And so that's not necessarily a clinical session, but it's making sure that they have somebody they can check in with every week and set goals and make sure that they are getting connection with either another veteran or a peer. And so I would just say we should be open to whatever door, as I said at the initial onset, whatever door is available to them, whether it's through the VA or in their community. And oftentimes that is high quality evidence-based care. So it's very important that we continue to press on that and work with our partners like the administration and the VA. Secondly, with the employment, I would say COVID has something to do with that in what we have found with warriors. There's difficulties as a lot of Americans are feeling. There's increased levels of anxiety and uncertainty, and that has carried over a little bit into as they are job searching or as they are employed. Another thing that they've told us year over year is mentorship means something. If they are in an organization where there is maybe a veterans affinity group, or there are other veterans that they can connect with, maybe somebody who is perhaps in a leadership role, that mentorship is very meaningful to them as they navigate some of the maybe transition issues from military to civilian employment. And that's really important to having a successful employment relationship. At least that's what they've told us year over year. And so I would just say that maybe is to the uniqueness as to, because they are higher educated. Our women warriors are even more educated than the male veterans that we have, and still there's higher employment issues with that. But I would say that mentorship and that peer relationships are very important once they get into that civilian employer. Melanie?
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
No, perfect. Yeah, Melanie, over to you.
Absolutely. Staying on the employment track, that is something I would like to add is that, Michael, you're right. When we look at the general post 9/11 veteran population at the same time, the unemployment rate was about 3%. So we certainly see a unique number hovering around that 13% with the warriors that are registered with us, and their unemployment rate being higher despite being more educated, as Jen mentioned. So one of the things that we've done is look at what are the barriers related to the unemployment. So those warriors that are eligible to be in the workforce, what are some of the things that get in the way from them either securing or sustaining meaningful employment? And the top barrier that we see, and it's pretty consistent, are mental or psychological distress. Then coming in a distant second is, lack of skills or knowledge related to the civilian workforce and lack of education. But really, it always raises to the top of the impact of their mental health in being a challenge and a barrier to having that meaningful, sustained employment, which we know is so important to overall quality of life.
Thank you. Tracy.
Since Melanie jumped on employment, I'll jump on mental health care. I think one of the things that Jen talked about that can't be underemphasized is the access issue. Whether it's hours, I'm in a full-time job and I can't find something that shows in the evening or on the weekends. Saturday, Sunday are my only 2 days because I'm working 8 to 6. And then with commute, it's whatever it is, right? So finding ways, and many have found it through telehealth. Many have found it through other ways of addressing their mental health concerns, but finding ways to open that aperture as a community, I think, is extremely important.
Excellent. Terri, anything you'd like to add at this juncture, and then we'll go to audience questions.
Sure. And thank you. I think that, hitting on these two themes is really important as we think about kind of ensuring pathways to economic opportunity. Certainly addressing the needs around mental health are going to be critically important for that. We know that when you treat mental health problems with evidence-based treatments, high quality care, you actually not only see a reduction in the symptoms and recovery, but you also see increased opportunities economically for those who can re-enter the workforce. So I think these two topics are really related. And I think I just would like to really emphasize something that Jen said, that when we do talk about providing pathways to care for veterans that are experiencing mental health issues, we want to do so in ensuring kind of low barrier options to affordable, high quality care. And it's important to kind of, as Jen has said, reflect that this high quality care means that we're delivering evidence-based forms of treatment and making sure that the providers who are serving this population have the appropriate training and cultural competency. We know that VA performs very well in comparison to non-VA settings. And as Jen said, some of these other partnerships have been really instrumental in ensuring access to additional capacity to highly trained providers, and kind of thinking about kind of how we integrate those services into other settings, how we kind of address the needs of the whole individual. Certainly that's something that VA has been focused on through the Whole Health Initiative, in ways that we can provide additional integrative approaches. Focused on also continuing to improve the transition process for service members, and think about additional apprenticeship programs and kind of ways in which we can support veterans entering the civilian workforce, I think are going to be instrumental to kind of address their long-term outcomes in particular. But, it is important to kind of focus again on this population, which is a unique population within the context of all veterans, on thinking through what are the specific types of solutions that are going to help them be successful. So thanks.
Thank you. As I go to audience questions now, I want to just do a quick lightning round to see if anybody wants to add a website or a phone number, because you've all alluded to a lot of great resources that are out there. And just to make it easy for folks to begin the process of searching, I know the woundedwarriorproject.org is one place, but if I could just go in order, everything from that to government services to suicide prevention hotlines, anything you might want to quickly add here. We'll have a little bit of a data round, and then I'll go to the audience questions. Jen, do you want to start?
I would just say we should always know and talk about the Veterans Crisis Line, 800-273-8255, or you can text 838-255, and you choose one if you called in. And then our resource center is 888-997-2586, 888-999 or 997-2586. So
super.
I think that's enough.
Why don't you repeat them all though, just one more time each, go ahead.
Yeah, so the VCL, the Veterans Crisis Line, 800-273-8255, press 1, or you can text 838-255. And our resource center is 888-997-2586.
Great. And just to remind folks, this is being recorded and will be available as a recording on our website too. So if you want to go back and get that information at your leisure, of course, it'll be there. Anybody want to add anything else, Melanie?
Yes, if anybody wants to download the survey, get the executive summary, the full report, which goes into a lot more detail on the comprehensive findings, that can be downloaded at annualwarriorsurvey.org.
And Tracy,
I would just add that in addition to the WWP Resource Center, you can find locations for the VA at www.va.gov. And I know that the Resource Center does connect folks to the VA, but just want to highlight that as well.
Excellent. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to now take maybe 3 audience questions at a time. And we've got about a dozen, so we'll probably go through 4 rounds. You don't have to speak to each question, each of you, of course, but if something strikes you, please feel free, and I'll go through maybe in the same order. But question 1 is, I would appreciate it if the panel could speak to the needs of veterans in terms of suicide prevention and what groups like the Wounded Warrior Project, but also the government can do to address this issue more than has already been done. And then a second question, how do you feel that invisible and chronic illnesses like long COVID, MS, fibromyalgia, and other disorders that are prevalent in the military and veterans communities will shape issues of care, benefits, and support going forward? So building, going past PTSD and TBI and other more sort of famous or infamous disabilities or challenges. And then finally, how has the VA system improved over the past few years, and what are some programs offered that we may not know about? So why don't I leave those three questions with you and start with Jennifer.
I'll take the first one in terms of directly about suicide prevention or the suicide issues that are very important for anybody serving veterans. I think we need to talk about it explicitly, whether, talking with a fellow veteran, don't be afraid to ask, and ask how they're feeling, and ask them directly if they have a plan or if they're thinking about it. We believe very robustly in training. With all the partners that we have in this space, we make sure that there are opportunities to get trained in suicide prevention. So the whole space, whether you are working with a warrior, a veteran with employment issues, or you are working with them on improving their physical health, that you can be trained to talk to them about that and to step in and intervene. And so I think that's a really important tactic that whether you're a VSO, I know the VA trains it, and anybody who's working with veterans, we have community partner, corporate partners like CSX, where they have trained their workforce to in suicide prevention because they helped sponsor the survey. And so where we can all as a country talk about it, because it's not just veterans, it's a problem for the entire United States. And so I think that's an important part of our whole suicide prevention roadmap that we have at Wounded Warrior Project. So I'll take that one. Yeah, I'll pass it to Melanie.
Sure.
Yes.
And I'd be happy to talk a little bit about really what we have as far as existing data, looking more at the chronic issues and challenges, and specifically one of the areas that our population, again, the specific subset of post 9/11 veterans that are wounded, injured, or ill, while we've got about 77% of the population at a 70% VA rating or higher, this population also experiences chronic pain. And in fact, the overwhelming majority, virtually all warriors, 97%, have reported some level of pain. And so really that the perseverance of that chronic issue and challenge, what we see is that really it impacts overall quality of life. Willingness to engage in physical activity. If we're not engaging in regular physical activity, what are the potential negative consequences related to overall health and well-being that come from that? So it really becomes that linchpin for a myriad of other health concerns. So certainly this is a very pressing concern. And one of the things with the modification in our survey design, we'll be able to look at the impacts of aging, which certainly ties to this concern as well, looking at how that's going to evolve over time to perhaps intervene and get ahead of some of those pending changes as a result of the natural aging process that are going to be a little bit more nuanced and specific to this population who have experienced many injuries and illnesses.
Just a quick clarification for me. I'm sure many of the people listening know this much better than I do, but can you help us understand what it means to have a 70% disability rating? What's that number actually mean? Either in terms of maybe giving an example of some common injuries that might roughly typically translate to that level, or what is the 70% meant to capture? Is that meant to be some reflection of the ability to hold a job, or is it more about how much extra help they're going to need from healthcare providers? What does that number mean?
Sure. And I'll go in layman's terms, and I'll certainly defer to anybody else on the call to be able to bolster it with more specific indicators. But really what this is indicating to us is the severity of the injury and the impact on the overall warrior's lifestyle and life, and how that injury is impacting their ability to sustain employment or the impact of the injury overall. But that's a very layman's definition. Jen, I know, can speak much more specifically about what a 70% rating can refer to.
Sure. I would just say it's usually different conditions, definitely comorbidity in that rating, and that is due to their injuries, illness, or wounds incurred during service, and how that impacts them in their future earnings capabilities or they are rated for what happened to them in service. And so we have the population that we serve is not like the general post 9/11 veteran population. These are warriors who have complex issues and due to their time in service. And so it's a really important population to hear where their challenges are, because they are going to be in the system that is built to serve them long term.
Thank you. Tracy.
Sure, and I will tackle the last question. With regards to improvements that have occurred in the VA, whole health was mentioned earlier. The expansion of that program, as well as the adoption by many physicians to incorporate whole health into what they talk to their veterans about, has enabled new improvements in their own healthcare and better quality of life. Additionally, the expansion of women's health clinics and adding more gender-specific services has enabled more women to access the VA and have access to the care that they need. They're addressing reproduction and fertility services, mammograms, all those types of things that women specific. And then finally, two things. One, the VA has always had a robust research program, but seeing a lot of what's coming out of there is influencing care across the nation, and as well as the Secretary taking steps to address toxic exposure and trying to get ahead of that. So I think those are some key elements.
Thank you. And Terri.
They did a great job. Certainly made my job a lot easier in describing kind of what a disability compensation rating is and kind of where we've seen improvements. I will kind of just reflect that the Department of Veterans Affairs healthcare system is specifically designed to meet the needs of veterans who we know are at higher risk for some complications and the types of health conditions that you mentioned, Michael. So kind of ensuring that we have a robust infrastructure that is focused on, expanding access to those services and kind of thinking about not just the research mission that the VA serves, but the training mission. I mean, a high proportion of healthcare professionals in the United States train through the Department of Veterans Affairs, and kind of that unique opportunity that the VA has in informing and shaping US healthcare more broadly, but certainly as a unique place to serve the needs of those with service-connected health problems and maintain the competencies and capabilities that we know are needed for the unique conditions that veterans face. And certainly some of the innovations that we've seen in treating kind of mental health and traumatic brain injury and kind of the other types of conditions that have been discussed and where we're headed with, creating more resources for environmental exposures are really important for ensuring that those capabilities exist for this unique population.
Thank you all. So now we'll go to round two, and we'll see if we also have time for round three, but we'll start with 3 or 4 more. One has to do with the prospects for the legislation that a couple of you referred to that would generalize benefits for those who are exposed to toxic substances and what you see as the prospects for that legislation reaching the finish line. The second question has to do, has VA considered teaming up with DoD on veterans housing to leverage the underutilized capacity on military bases to build and manage veterans housing on bases? Third question, are there specific issues that arise for veterans on social media and what interventions may be needed in that space? And then let's see if I can sneak in one more. While WWP does phenomenal work for veterans, some charity rating agencies have concluded that 60 cents out of every dollar make it to veterans. So whether that's accurate or not, it gives you a chance, I guess, to speak to that perception that some may have. Why isn't the WWP more efficient? I'm not vouching for the accuracy of that number myself, but that's one of the questions that's been directed. So why don't we maybe go in reverse order this time, Terri, and then work our way through Tracy, Melanie, and to Jen.
Okay, great. I'm going to do my best to remember exactly what you asked. Certainly on the housing, that's a great idea. I'll have to kind of take that into consideration and kind of look at that. We have reprioritized ending veteran homelessness as part of a pledge that Secretary Fudge and Secretary McDonough have made. And so we've seen some really important strides being made in expanding access to homelessness programs and kind of housing opportunities for veterans who are homeless. But great suggestion on, we'll have to explore all options as we think about this problem. So I don't have anything specific on that. What was your next question, Michael?
One was about the prospects for the legislation on sort of ensuring access for those who have had toxic exposure.
Well, we're eager to see how this continues to play out on the Hill. And I know that we are very interested in making sure that we can get policy to the president's desk for signature, as this is something that's really critically important to us and to him personally, that we can deliver timely access to services and benefits for those who've been adversely impacted by environmental exposures. So we're eager to kind of continue to see how the legislation progresses. We know that there's been a piece that has passed the Senate and that we know that the House is taking up their legislation very, very soon. So we continue to kind of work with our partners and see from the Hill and kind of see how things are going to progress. And then the last one?
There's one about social media, and then there was the one for WWP friends that I won't ask you to address.
But I'll just turn it over to them to be able to kind of get to some of these questions, because I think they're probably better served and better in touch with the stories and the experiences of some of the individual warriors.
Okay, great. Tracy.
Sure. So I will tackle the social media question and really highlight perhaps gaming. Because sometimes when we talk about social media, we're talking about Instagram and we're talking about Facebook and we're talking about Twitter and all the other metrics or platforms that are out there. But we have found that almost 50% of Wounded Warrior Project warriors indicate that they do video gaming and up to about an average of 16.6 hours per week. So that's a lot of time on that platform. And we've started in our world, we have Discord, which is a gaming platform, and we monitor it and have ensured that there's a safe environment with interventions happening not regularly, but when needed, when called out, they do occur. I also know that there's quite a few research studies being done with AI on the social platforms to have an alert process going when somebody has suicidal ideations or the Discord, not to use that word again, but the Discord gets a little too intense. And so everything we are interested in and is studying as an organization as well as a nation.
Thank you. Melanie.
Pick up, and I'm going to continue with the thread of social media and talking about really the propensity, not through only the gaming channels, but we heard earlier during our remarks that the use of telehealth, and certainly I wouldn't substitute social media for any professional counseling, but certainly meeting warriors where they are and using platforms such as social media is certainly something that is becoming more and more commonplace. So how do we leverage those platforms? We also see the importance of connection. Tracy talked about the impact of being able to be connected to other veterans reduces the symptomology related to PTSD by 57%. That's remarkable, and that's through that connection. And certainly we can look to maximize and enhance that through social media platforms. And the other data point that I will throw out, because it's not just about mere connection. Warriors are lonely. We see that more than half, about 62% of warriors have this sense of being lonely, and really the specific areas of opportunity when it comes to support, whether it be through a gap that could be filled through a social media channel or other outlets, is really having somebody where they can have as a resource to talk through when they're dealing with a problem. And so really that supportive environment, we certainly don't need to get into, the opportunity of social media being that type of platform, but that ability to connect, as we've said on multiple occasions, is really a powerful tool and an insulator to suicide. So really a critical piece as we look forward to what does connection look like in the future.
Thank you very much. And Jen, over to you.
Great. I guess I'll tackle the one about Wounded Warrior Project and what we are able to provide and the ratio there. So 100% of the resources that come into Wounded Warrior Project go towards our mission of honoring and empowering wounded warriors and their families. And so we provide life-changing and life-saving programs that they do not pay a penny for. And so we also don't take any federal or state funding. And so it is up to us to make sure that we raise the funds, well over $200 million a year poured into these programs, like I said, across the country. And we serve well over 160,000 warriors and family members. And so we kind of have to raise it and get out there and to make sure that we can provide those innovative life-saving programs. And so our latest 990, we're always at the 70% mark with that. I suggest everybody can look at our 990. We post that every year, and I love to answer those questions and provide information. We operate on scale because we want to impact this entire generation. And so we want to pour as much money as possible into the programs that can really help the service members and their families thrive after service. And so that's what we do. We're pretty proud of the work that we do.
And we're very proud to team with you. And so as we near the end of this, let's see if we have time for one final round of questions. There's one that may or may not speak directly to your expertise, but it's the question that's become more prevalent about veterans being susceptible to recruiting efforts by extremist groups. And does WWP or the White House have anything to say in the context of this discussion today in regard to that important issue? Then another question, again, you've spoken to it already to some extent, but are there equity gaps or issues revealed by the results of the survey? You've talked a little bit about female-specific issues here, but maybe this can help with a wrap-up to reemphasize some of those themes as you wish. And then what is the role of community organizations and VSOs, voluntary service organizations, in meeting the changing needs of veterans? Is there a way for government in preparing these groups to step into these important roles? So you've already alluded to public-private partnerships. Maybe it's one more chance to hit at that in closing. And then let me give you one final question, with apologies to those questions I won't quite get to, but has the combination of COVID and then the Afghanistan sadness of the defeat there that resulted from our withdrawal, have these affected the wounded veteran population in ways that you can see in your information that have statistical significance? So again, that's a lot to put on your table, but why don't we finish with those four, and anything you want to say by way of wrap up as well, since a couple of the questions did sort of channel us back towards big themes that you've already identified. So Jennifer, if we could please start with you.
Great. We actually didn't ask questions related to the extremist question, the first one, but in this, what we have found, I'll go to that last one when you talked about Afghanistan. We made over 30,000 calls to warriors who served in Afghanistan last fall in the September timeframe. We found it to be very helpful just to make sure that they knew we were thinking of them. It was shown to be a little bit of a stressful time. And so we just were there to make sure that they knew we were here for them, and we were able to get them into care if that was what they wanted, or other things. They were already, I would say, one of the things to think about is, a COVID on top of that was just a couple, 1-2 punch in terms of warriors, and we were very grateful to be able to serve them in that way. We served a lot of warriors with mental health obstacles last fall, and we were grateful to be able to do it. I would say the role, and then I'll stop, but just to kind of wrap up, double down on the partnership piece. Anybody who is working with veterans, so that's VSOs, veteran service organizations, the VA, nobody can do it alone. The VA can't do it alone. We can't do it alone. Nobody wants to replace, or nor can they replace, the VA. And so we have to work together collaboratively and solve these tough problems and really help the warriors and their families be what they are meant to be. I think they're the greatest resource for our nation. And they are very strong. And I think just helping them with some of the challenges helps our entire fabric of our nation. And so I would just say, where we can make sure our shields are down and work collaboratively, sign us up every day for that.
Awesome. Thank you. Melanie.
Absolutely. And I'll reiterate when talking about kind of the equity pieces, I would like to, because I don't believe I inserted in my opening remarks, when we're talking about representativeness of the Wounded Warrior Project population, really when we speak specifically about race and ethnicity, the wounded warrior population is more diverse than the broader U.S. veteran, post 9/11 veteran, and the U.S. general population. So when we look at the pressing challenges, needs, and evolving concerns within this population, it really takes into account the very diverse nature of the population that we serve. As far as areas where there are gaps that we've specifically dove into, and as a result, as Tracy mentioned, specifically stood up the Women Warriors Initiative, are in terms of women warriors being more educated, but there being a gap in pay amongst this population. We also see slightly higher elevated levels of chronic pain amongst the women warriors. On the positive side, we also see, and it was mentioned earlier, the increased utilization of telehealth medicine to access care. So there's certainly both sides of that, but that's been one area where we did see some inequity, have put resources towards it, and are looking to areas where we can, in collaboration with our partners in the space and through communicating data like this, reduce those gaps. So I'll turn it back over to Tracy.
Tracy, please.
So to double down on what Jen said about community and collaboration, I think it's important that we all know who's in our backyards, whether it's those we're serving, those other nonprofits and the VA that we can work with, or those collaboration opportunities like CSX mentioned at the beginning of this, where we can work as a team to ensure that all veterans in our community are thriving. And the only way you can do that is through research like we do with the AWS, or research by hitting the ground and talking to people and not staying in your own little bubble.
Thank you. And Terri.
Yeah, thank you. So you hit on a lot of various different topics. So I think I'll just kind of reinforce that, this year has been a difficult time for many Americans and veterans in particular. And I think, as Jen mentioned, in reaching out and checking in and making sure that they know their service mattered and that we are here for them, and that certainly that the VA has been doing very consistently to ensure that all those veterans who are served at VA know that VA is there for them. With respect to addressing issues and concerns about extremist behavior, certainly we are focused on trying to combat misinformation across the board, but also trying to focus on how we can ensure we protect our veterans as well from that types of misinformation. And nothing more to report there, just know that this is something that we're very concerned and have seen a lot of reports about veterans being taken advantage of. And the partnerships are going to be critical. Jen said it great. Nobody can do this. No one organization, no one entity can do this alone. So continuing to support this population is going to take critical partnerships with community-based organizations, veteran service organizations, military support organizations, and others as we do our best to ensure that all those who have needs can get the services that they deserve. So thanks.
It's been an amazing panel. I do have two tiny last questions. Well, they're big issues, but they're very specific. And so I won't ask all four of you to comment, but these are the last two. So I will have done the audience the full, the full range of their questions will have been addressed. If anybody wants to comment on either one. Question one, did the surveys get at issues of alcoholism and drug use, including opioids? Any trends there that you want to mention? And then secondly, did the surveys get at issues of food insecurity specifically, above and beyond financial insecurity? And with brief answers to those questions, that will take us just about to 222 on 22222, and then we can wish everyone the best and hope that's a good omen for our future work and our future veteran population. So anybody want to comment on either the alcoholism and drug use issue or the hunger question?
Sure, I can talk briefly about both of those. So when we're talking about drug abuse, we're looking at warriors within our population who have used drugs other than those that were required for medical reasons in the past year. And the overwhelming majority, so over 87% of those warriors that completed the survey said no. When you look at then, that leaves about 13% of individuals who endorsed that they had used drugs for other reasons other than as prescribed. The majority of those individuals were low levels of problems related to drug abuse. let me distill that down to the biggest takeaway from there. When you look at the entire Wounded Warrior Project population, we're looking at under 2%, 1.3% of warriors that report based on their response to the survey that there would be a severe problem related to drug abuse. So certainly that is, a small fraction of this population. So 1 in 100 would have a severe level related to drug abuse. As far as food insecurity, obviously, one of the key findings in the survey is that warriors, more than 2 in 5 warriors had a hard time making ends meet. And so in the population, we did see that there were lower levels of high food security within the population, and higher levels of very low food security. For those familiar with looking at how this is measured, really at the population overall, broadly speaking, our population really straddled between being food secure and food insecure. About a third of individuals within the survey population met the threshold to be classified as being food insecure. So about 1/3 would hit that threshold for me being classified as being insecure.
Well, in brief conclusion, let me just say, first of all, how grateful I am personally and how grateful we are at Brookings to be able to team with such outstanding Americans and great organizations at Wounded Warrior Project and the White House and many others who I know have contributed with questions and participation. Let me do something that I know you do every day with your work, but we all should feel in our hearts every day, which is a word of thanks and admiration to our veterans and their families, and best wishes going forward. And again, for those who want to survey that report on their own or look at the survey in greater detail, you can find it at woundedwarriorsproject.org, but the specific website, one last time for the last word, if one of you could remind us about exactly where the survey is located.
Annualwarriorsurvey.org. So annualwarriorsurvey.org.
So with that, signing off from Brookings with best wishes to everyone for hopefully a early arrival of spring and a good rest of 2022. Thank you and goodbye.